Walter Grayson stood at the edge of the stage, his cane lightly tapping the floor. His eyes, clouded by cataracts, saw only shadows, but he felt the weight of the room. 300 students, their murmurs like the distant rumble of artillery. At 78, Walter was lean, his posture stooped but unyielding, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and khakis, pressed out of habit. On his left forearm, barely visible under a rolled-up sleeve, an eagle and anchor tattoo peeked out, its ink blurred by time. In his pocket, a dog tag pressed against his thigh, a relic he carried not for show, but for memory. The principal, Mrs. Hargrove, had invited him to speak at the school's Veterans Day assembly, a last-minute replacement when a local congressman canceled. Walter hadn't wanted to come. He hadn't spoken publicly about the war, Vietnam, 1968, in decades. But Hargrove had been persistent, her voice kind but firm over the phone. "The kids need to hear from someone who was there," she'd said. Walter, never one for arguing, agreed, though he dreaded standing before a crowd that might not care. Now, waiting in the wings, he heard a teacher's sharp clap. "Quiet, everyone!" Her voice was strained, battling a wave of teenage indifference. Walter caught the creak of chairs, the rustle of backpacks, an occasional snicker. He gripped his cane tighter, the wood smooth under his calloused palm. He'd faced worse: mortar fire, jungle heat, the screams of men he couldn't save. But this felt different. Exposed. Maybe pointless. Mrs. Hargrove's heels clicked as she approached the microphone. "Good morning, students," she began, her tone polished but warm. "Today we honor those who've served our country. Our guest, Mr. Walter Grayson, is a Vietnam War veteran, a Marine who—" A sharp laugh cut her off, loud enough to echo. Walter's jaw tightened. He couldn't see the source, but he knew the sound. Boredom laced with mockery. Hargrove pressed on, unfazed. "Who served with courage and has graciously agreed to share his story. Please give him your respect and attention." The room quieted, but it was a grudging silence, broken by whispers and the tap of phones under desks. Walter stepped forward, guided by Hargrove's gentle touch on his elbow. The stage creaked under his weight, and he felt the spotlight's heat on his face. He stood at the podium, his cane resting against it, and cleared his throat. The microphone squealed briefly, drawing a few stifled laughs. "Good morning," Walter said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "I ain't much for speeches, never was, but they asked me to talk, so here I am." He paused, waiting for something, a reaction, a sign. Nothing came. Just the faint hum of the auditorium's old heating system and an occasional cough. He felt their eyes, or perhaps their absence, drifting to phones, to friends, to anything but him. He was invisible, just an old man in a room that didn't want him. The thought stung, sharper than he'd expected. He'd been ignored before, by VA clerks, waitresses who assumed he was just another retiree, a world that had moved on from his war. But this was different. These were kids, the ones he'd fought for, or at least for their parents' generation. And they didn't care. He started anyway. "I was 19 when I shipped out to Vietnam," he said. "Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. Didn't know much about the world then. Didn't know much about anything except how to follow orders." A chair scraped loudly in the back. A girl's voice whispered, "This is so boring." Walter's hands tightened on the podium. He could walk off, leave them to their phones and chatter. No one would stop him. But he thought of Tommy. Tommy Delgado, his best friend, his brother in arms, gone 57 years now. Tommy, who never got to grow old, who never stood on a stage like this. Walter owed him more than walking away. "Let me tell you about a friend of mine," Walter said, his voice steadying. His name was Tommy Delgado. He was from El Paso, Texas. Loved baseball, loved his mama's tamales, loved telling bad jokes that'd make you groan. He was the kind of guy who'd give you his last cigarette, even if he was dying for a smoke. The room shifted slightly, a ripple of curiosity. Walter pressed on, his words slow but deliberate. "We were in the jungle near Khe Sanh, summer of '68. Hot as hell, wet all the time, bugs eating you alive. Tommy and me, we were in the same squad. He was the point man, always walking ahead, checking for traps, for ambushes, brave as anything, but he never acted like it. Just did his job. Walter's fingers brushed the dog tag in his pocket, its edges worn smooth. He didn't need to see it to know the name stamped there. Thomas R. Delgado, USMC. One day, he continued, we're on patrol, moving through this valley. It's quiet. Too quiet, you know? Like the world's holding its breath. Tommy's up front, maybe 20 yards ahead. I'm watching his back, like always. Then it happens. He paused, the memory sharp as a blade. The crack of gunfire, the thud of mortars, the earth screaming. Ambush, he said simply. They hit us hard. North Vietnamese, dug in deep. Bullets flying, explosions everywhere. Tommy, he's yelling for us to get down, but he's still out there, still moving, trying to spot where they're firing from. He was always like that. Thinking of us first. Walter's voice dropped to a near whisper. I saw him go down, he said, shot in the chest. I ran to him, dragged him behind a tree. He was bleeding bad, but he's still talking, telling me to get out, to leave him. Like I'd ever do that. His throat tightened, but he pushed through. I held him, tried to stop the bleeding. He looked at me, and you know what he said? Tell my mom I did good. That was it. Then he was gone. The room was silent now, and the kind that presses on your chest. Walter felt it, even blind. He straightened, his shoulders squaring like they had in his dress blues decades ago. Tommy Delgado was 20 years old when he died. He didn't get to come home, didn't get to grow old, didn't get to stand here and tell you this himself. So I'm doing it for him. A boy in the front row shifted, his phone forgotten on his lap. A girl near the aisle leaned forward, her eyes wide. Walter couldn't see them, but he felt the change, like a tide turning. He wasn't done yet. I carried his dog tag out of that jungle, Walter said, pulling it from his pocket and holding it up. The metal glinted under the stage lights, a small, battered thing that carried a man's life. This is all I've got left of him. But it's enough to remind me what he stood for. What we all stood for. Duty, honor, each other. He paused, letting the words settle. You kids, you've got your whole lives ahead. You've got phones, games, dreams bigger than anything I ever had. And that's good. That's what we fought for. But don't forget the ones who made it possible. The ones who didn't come back. The ones who gave everything so you could sit here, free, bored, alive. The silence held, heavy and unbroken. Then, from the back, a single clap. Another joined it, then another, until the room erupted in applause. Not wild, not forced, but steady, respectful. Walter stood still, his cane steady against the podium, his face unreadable. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected anything. Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, her voice thick. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. That was, powerful. She turned to the students. I hope you all take a moment to reflect on what we've heard today. As the applause faded, a boy stood up in the third row. He was lanky, maybe 16, with a Letterman jacket slung over his chair. Mr. Grayson, he said, his voice cracking slightly, I'm sorry we weren't listening at first. That was wrong. What you said means something. Thank you. For Tommy, too. Walter nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. Appreciate that, son, he said quietly. Means more than you know. Another student stood, a girl with braided hair and a notebook clutched to her chest. My grandpa was in Vietnam, she said. He doesn't talk about it much, but I'm going to ask him now. Because of you. One by one, others rose. A boy in a hoodie, a girl with a cheerleader's pin, a quiet kid who hadn't spoken all semester. They didn't say much, just small words of thanks, of connection. Walter listened, his sightless eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room, his heart heavy with something he hadn't felt in years. Recognition. Then came the moment that changed everything. A man in the back, unnoticed until now, stood. He was in his 40s, dressed in a crisp Marine Corps uniform, captain's bars gleaming on his collar. He'd slipped in late, standing quietly by the door. Now he walked forward, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor. The students turned, the room falling silent again. Mr. Grayson, the captain said, his voice clear and strong, I'm Captain Daniel Ruiz, 2nd Marine Division. I was in the back listening. Your story, Tommy's story, hit me hard. I lost men in Afghanistan, good men. I know what it means to carry their names. He stopped at the edge of the stage, standing at attention. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a salute, sharp and unwavering. On behalf of the Corps, and for Tommy Delgado, Semper Fi, sir. Walter's breath caught. He couldn't see the salute, but he felt it, like a current running through him. He straightened, his old Marine instincts kicking in, and returned the salute, his hand steady, despite the years. Semper Fi, he whispered. The room was still, every eye on the two men, one old, one younger, bound by something bigger than themselves. Then Captain Ruiz turned to the students. This man, he said, pointing to Walter, is why we serve. He carried his brother's memory for 57 years. That's what honor looks like. Don't forget it. The applause came again, louder this time, but Walter barely heard it. He was thinking of Tommy, of the jungle, of the promise he'd kept. He felt Hargrove's hand on his arm, guiding him off the stage, but before he left, he heard the captain's voice again, addressing the crowd. I want to propose something, Ruiz said. This school needs a way to remember men like Tommy Delgado. I'm going to work with Mrs. Hargrove to start a scholarship in his name. For students who show the kind of courage and loyalty Mr. Grayson talked about. Who's with me? Hands shot up, voices rising in agreement. Walter paused at the stage's edge, his cane still, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't come here to change anything, just to tell a story. But maybe, just maybe, Tommy's name would live on a little longer. 3 months had passed since Walter Grayson stood on the stage in Willow Creek, holding Tommy Delgado's dog tag before 300 students. That day left a mark on the town, like a stone tossed into a still lake. Ripples spread, but the water soon settled. Winter had come to Virginia, bringing a cold wind that howled through the bare branches of maples along Patriot Street. The flag near the school still fluttered, but its sound was drowned out by the rumble of school buses and children's laughter. Life moved on. The Tommy Delgado Scholarship became a reality faster than anyone expected. Captain Daniel Ruiz, true to his promise, worked with Mrs. Hargrove and the local Veterans Association to raise funds. Students joined in, organizing bake sales, selling cookies and T-shirts with Semper Fi and an eagle silhouette. The local diner, Dixie Diner, donated a percentage of its monthly sales, and the bank on Main Street provided a starting grant. By January, the scholarship was official, a $2,000 annual award for a Willow Creek student who demonstrated courage, loyalty, and community dedication. A plaque appeared on the school's honor board, Tommy Delgado's name engraved in gold letters, beneath it, in honor of those who gave all. But Walter, his name wasn't on the plaque, and as often happens, the man who sparked it all began to fade from conversations. At first, he was mentioned often, in the school newspaper, in local ex-chats, even in the pastor's Sunday sermon. That blind veteran, people said, nodding respectfully. But over time, his name blurred, replaced by a vague, that old Marine, or simply, the veteran. The students who'd applauded him returned to their lives, exams, football games, prom planning. Captain Ruiz went back to his unit at Camp Lejeune, his letters to Hargrove growing infrequent. Mrs. Hargrove, swamped with school duties, rarely mentioned Walter, though she felt a twinge of guilt when she passed the plaque. Walter felt it. He wasn't one to crave attention, but the silence hurt. He lived on the edge of Willow Creek in a small house that smelled of old wood and the coffee he brewed each morning. His days were quiet, a radio tuned to classical music, the creak of his rocking chair, monthly calls from a social worker. Tommy's dog tag sat on the nightstand by his bed, next to a yellowed letter from Tommy's mother, dated 1969. Walter hadn't read it in years, couldn't, even if his eyes allowed, but he knew every word by heart. Thank you for being with my boy until the end. One February morning, as snow dusted the sidewalks, Walter decided to walk to Dixie Diner. He rarely went out, but that day the cold felt less biting, the loneliness heavier. His cane tapped along the cobblestone, echoing in the quiet street. Inside the diner, the air smelled of fried bacon and syrup, a radio playing country tunes. Walter took his usual spot at the counter by the window, where he could feel the sun's warmth, even if he couldn't see it. The waitress, a young girl named Kayla, poured him coffee without asking. "How you doing, Mr. Grayson?" she asked, her voice light but distant. She hadn't been at the school assembly, but had heard about the veteran who moved everyone. Walter smiled, his fingers wrapping around the warm mug. "Not bad, Kayla. You?" She mumbled something about school and moved to another customer. Walter listened as the diner buzzed around him, the clink of dishes, laughter, snippets of talk about the weather and a basketball game. No one mentioned the scholarship. No one mentioned Tommy. And of course, no one mentioned Walter. He wasn't bitter. Not exactly. He knew how the world worked. People move forward, memories fade. But there was a part of him, small but stubborn, that wanted someone to remember. Not for himself, but for Tommy. For all the boys whose names never made it onto plaques. That same week, the school prepared for the first Tommy Delgado scholarship ceremony. The auditorium was decked with red and blue ribbons, a podium bearing the Marine Corps emblem. Students buzzed with excitement, but not for the scholarship. For most, it was just another event, a chance to skip class. The first award was set to go to Emily Rodriguez, the girl with braids who'd promised to ask her grandpa about Vietnam after Walter's speech. She'd organized a volunteer project to support veterans at a local shelter, and the committee unanimously chose her. Walter had been invited to the ceremony, but the invitation arrived late, lost in his mailbox under a pile of junk flyers. Mrs. Hargrove meant to call, but was sidetracked by school chaos, budget reports, parent meetings. Walter only learned of the event a day prior, when Kayla at the diner mentioned her younger brother preparing for some ceremony at school. "Something about a veteran, I think," she said, unaware Walter was that veteran. He decided to go, not for recognition, but because it was for Tommy. On the day of the ceremony, he wore his old Marine jacket, faded but clean, with a barely visible 3rd Battalion patch. His cane tapped along the sidewalk as he walked to the school, the frosty air nipping at his cheeks. The school lobby smelled of floor wax and paper decorations. He heard the hum of students, the creak of chairs, muffled laughter. No one greeted him, no one recognized him. He found a seat in the back row, his cane resting quietly by his feet. The ceremony began with the national anthem, sung by the school choir. Mrs. Hargrove gave a speech, praising Emily and her project. She mentioned Tommy Delgado, calling him a hero whose sacrifice inspires us. Not a word about Walter. Emily took the stage, her braids swaying as she accepted a certificate and a small medallion engraved with Tommy's name. The room applauded, cameras clicked. Walter sat quietly, his fingers gripping the dog tag in his pocket. He felt no bitterness, just a kind of emptiness. The scholarship was the right thing, but it felt detached from him, from the reality of what he'd lived through. He thought of the letter from Tommy's mother, her words, "You were his brother." Did anyone remember that he was the one who brought Tommy's story to this room? As the ceremony ended, Walter stood to leave, his cane tapping softly. But then he heard a voice, young, hesitant, but familiar. "Mr. Grayson?" It was Emily. She stood before him, holding the medallion. Her eyes glistened as if fighting tears. I didn't know you were here. Why weren't you invited on stage?" Walter smiled, his wrinkles deepening. "Doesn't matter, girl. This ain't about me, it's about Tommy." She shook her head. "No, that's not right. You told us about him. Without you, none of this would have happened." She turned to the room, where students were still milling, packing backpacks. "Wait here," she said, and ran to Hargrove. Minutes later, Mrs. Hargrove approached, her face flushed with shame. "Walter, I'm so sorry. I should have called, made sure you were honored. That's on me." Walter raised a hand. "It's all right, ma'am. I came for Tommy, not myself." But Emily wouldn't let it go. She returned to the stage, grabbing the microphone without permission. "Attention, everyone." Her voice trembled but held strong. "There's something we forgot to do today. Mr. Grayson is here in the back row. He's the one who told us about Tommy Delgado. Without him, there'd be no scholarship, and we forgot about him." The room fell silent. Students turned, searching for Walter. He stood, his figure distinct against the dim light. Emily continued, "My grandpa told me about Vietnam after I heard Mr. Grayson's story. He said people like Mr. Grayson didn't just fight, they carried their friends in their hearts their whole lives. We need to honor him." She stepped off the stage, holding the medallion, and approached Walter. "This is for you," she said, placing it in his palm. "From all of us, and from Tommy." Walter felt the cold metal, his fingers trembling. He couldn't see Emily's face, but he heard her voice, earnest and firm. The room erupted in applause, this time not for the scholarship, but for him. He heard someone shout, "Thank you, Mr. Grayson!" Others joined, their voices blending into a warm hum. Mrs. Hargrove took the microphone. "Emily's right," she said. "We owe Mr. Grayson more than we can say. I propose we add his name to the scholarship plaque as the keeper of Tommy Delgado's memory." The students cheered in agreement. Walter stood, his blind eyes feeling the crowd's warmth. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, his hand clutching the medallion. In his pocket was the letter from Tommy's mother, and for a moment he thought he heard her voice, "You were his brother." That evening, when Walter returned home, he placed the medallion on the nightstand beside the dog tag and the letter. He sat in his rocking chair, listening to the radio softly playing Debussy's Clair de Lune. Willow Creek had changed, if only a little. Students began volunteering at the Veterans Center, inspired by Emily. The school planned an annual Remembrance Day for veterans to share their stories. And the plaque in the lobby, soon to be updated, would bear two names, Tommy Delgado and Walter Grayson. Walter smiled to himself, his fingers brushing the dog tag. "We did it, Tommy," he whispered. For the first time in years, he felt his burden lighten.